you for staying with us. This is Nigeria Decides on Plus TV Africa. Now, the process of salary increment is a never-ending negotiation. The Nigerian Labour Congress and federal government has been having a tussle over the minimum wage for civil servants. It is now placed at 27,000. The issue of welfare of the workers. We're not particularly sure what we're going to be focusing on with this whole brouhaha that's coming up. I'm not alone in the studio, of course. I got my co-anchor.
That's right, we're here.
And we have guests joining us to talk about this very burning issue and how it affects the election. I have at the very end the only lady, or should I say the third lady here, Uche Okoli. She's a public affairs analyst. And of course, we have Chris Onyeka. He's the acting general secretary, United Labour Congress. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us on this very critical issue. We know that the minimum wage is the major issue of concern at this time, because we know that even if you're not a worker, you're connected to someone who is possibly a civil servant in Nigeria. But then this has dragged for too long, don't you think? Shouldn't we be talking about other issues by now?
It has dragged for too long. And also, let me correct an impression. The minimum wage is not for the civil servants alone. The civil servants are actually a minority segment, a minor segment in the minimum wage spectrum. And so it has to do with everybody. And so it's dragged for too long. The 18,000 naira minimum wage expired effectively the last day of December 2015. And before this time, we had started writing letters. Personally, I've written up to 60 letters to the federal government, SGF, the Minister of Labour, on minimum wage, on the need for us to start negotiation from 2015. And then nothing was done. 2016, until the unfortunate price hike in petroleum products, which organized labour decided to go on strike, and then there were interventions. One of the products of that intervention was the setting up of the 16-man technical committee that was supposed to now look at the issue entirely. And one of the outcomes of that 16-man technical committee was supposed to be the setting up of the tripartite committee to review the national minimum wage. And then when that committee submitted this report, it took a whole lot of time, a whole lot of pressures from us, letters from us, threats from us, before the committee, the tripartite committee, was inaugurated in 2017 ending, November. And now it took a whole lot of time again. At every stage in this process, we have had to endure a whole lot of pains.
Why is that so? Why is all the protocol?
I think that the people in charge, especially on the government side, have not shown enough maturity and enough consideration to the plight of Nigerian workers. If they had, we wouldn't be here by this time. We would have settled this issue.
Let me bring Uche in now. So close to the election, this government is almost at the door. What is the implication of this? Is there enough time for us to take this matter to the National Assembly? And with the meeting scheduled for Friday, is there a likelihood of another shutdown to the economy?
Well, I mean, the way things are going, you would have to think that that might be a possibility. This minimum wage, you know, it's a moral issue, in my opinion. You can't expect people to survive even on 30,000 naira, and that's the minimum wage. And I can't believe that we're still discussing that till today. Now, what I really want to understand is why this wasn't settled a long time ago. I can understand why Labour is pushing for it right now, because this is the time they can grab the government by the throat and get them to, you know, agree to something. You know, otherwise the campaign will be derailed, and lots of people might just, you know, have to think twice. The concern
now is the time frame. We have weeks to the next election.
Yeah.
Will Labour succeed with this agitation, or are we still going to end up moving it from this government to the next one? Because there are no guarantees that the ruling APC is going to be holding power next year, and we don't know who might be coming in and what their plans would be.
I think, you know, there is a strong possibility that they might get what they want. I think that's what happened the last time, and then the next government was then there to implement it, so to speak. But I don't know if they really implemented it.
The last time, you see, like I said, it has to take understanding and consideration that you're dealing with the lives of people. If you understand that, in 2011, the minimum wage law was passed in 1 day. 1 day. I was involved in that process. And so it was passed in 1 day at the National Assembly and was given assent by the president. And so it is possible that it could be done if the will is there.
Yes.
And the sensitivity to the plight of the people. You see, Nigerian workers are suffering. We are the most underpaid in Africa. That is not a joke. Nigerian workers are the most underpaid. The minimum wage in Nigeria is the least in Africa. That is the truth. And then we're talking about 30,000 naira, and somebody is saying 27,000. We're talking of a national minimum wage, not a public sector wage or a private sector wage, not a federal government wage, national wage, or a state government wage.
But why do you think Chris Ngige had to bring that in to say that the federal government would take care of 3,000 for the civil servants, and then the state government will have to decide whether they are going to
It shows you that people are playing politics with the lives of Nigerians. The minimum wage is connected to the type of school you go to, your children go to, the quality of food you put on table for your children, the kind of housing that you can access, your quality of life, okay? And if it falls short of that quantity that can take care of those basic needs, it begins to make you subhuman. And if people understand that, then they will understand the passion with which we are prepared to engage this situation.
But then we have several groups coming out to say, to advise Labour to accept, so that at least we can have a bit of peace in the polity and focus on election. Does that make sense?
Without justice, there will be no peace. The one that has not received justice will not sleep well in his own house. And as long as he cannot sleep well in his own house, you that is perpetrating injustice against him will also not sleep. Nigerian workers are cheated. And as long as we cheat them, we will not keep quiet. It will be responsible on our part as labor leaders to keep quiet and watch the federal government or whoever ride roughshod.
It's not about keeping quiet. She's saying, is there a possibility of Labour saying, okay, for peace to reign so we don't have too much issues, can we accept 27,000?
Because 27 is a close call to 30.
No, we have, you see, let's understand this. The National Council of State does not have any reason. Their intervention in the national minimum wage negotiation process is an aberration. It's illegal. It's unknown. Historically, it has never happened in Nigeria.
I think
international convention, it has never happened.
Shouldn't we see?
This is the first time it's happening.
Shouldn't we see it as an intervention to solve the problem?
No. It's unacceptable intervention. There is a legal process. There is a legal process. The legal process is the tripartite committee. The tripartite committee has done its work. Then one leg of that tripod cannot just stand up and say it's 27,000. That is unacceptable.
Chris, let's get to Chase's opinion on this.
I also don't see why Labour should stand down. This is their best opportunity to get what they want. You know, if I was Labour, and I feel like I'm Labour, you know, I wouldn't stand down. This wouldn't be the time to stand down. This would be the time to go out there shouting and, you know, let it be heard. Everybody should get involved in this. This is not a fight for just some people. It's a fight for everyone. No, absolutely. I would say, Labour, you just keep going. I mean, it's the government that needs to sort this out.
But then, Uche, I think that Nigeria is in a peculiar time in history.
Right.
We know the kind of challenges we are faced with. The federal government tells us, oh, we don't have funds, we don't have this, we don't have that. Of course, we know that they do a lot of appropriation to themselves, no problem.
Right.
You know.
Okay.
So I'm balancing now because I know you were going to take me up on that. Yes, but the last time the minimum wage was passed, it was done in 1 day. Chris attest to that.
Exactly, yes.
This time, the federal government is tough. Yeah, so do we have a chance now?
Well, I think we just have to go with it till the very end. You know, they have to keep pushing until there is no more room.
So it's not a case of take what's on the table and try to be fine with it.
I mean, 27,000.
What options are there?
It is critical we understand one thing. Nigerian workers and the masses are the sovereign.
Yes.
It's not those.
Okay, but we
or
certainly...
in the states,
yes.
the corridors of power.
Yes,
We are
the
sovereign.
citizen, Chris, the citizens are sovereign.
Yes.
That's all right.
So we have the
what
power.
options are there for resolution?
For resolution.
Because we're going to the elections now, and this is like a key issue that needs to be resolved before we go to the polls.
Well,
The polls
I
is
want to
just...
know,
in fact,
why did they offer 27? What's the 3K? What is that all about?
what are the
You know,
options in
the-
your
the-
opinion?
the
that are
30,000
The
available?
option should be that they should just give it the 30,000. It's
Simple.
not even too much to ask. Just
If you give us 30,000 today, no problem. The next minute it goes. 30,000 naira was not our figure. It was a compromise figure.
That's true.
Organized private sector pleaded with us to accept 30,000. And we did, because we wanted peace, like you said. And yet, it was snubbed. And we cannot continue like this. We have reached the end of our teters. We can't go any longer. We can't go back any further.
But then, aren't you seeing the possibility that what the federal government is trying to avoid is the possibility that in the event of certain states and private employers having difficulty with even meeting the obligation of paying 27,000 basic to their workers, don't you think that it is also a way to ensure that employers are able to at least attempt to pay?
I will tell you one thing. The private sector, those that are captured, okay, within the minimum wage legislation, don't have any problem paying 30,000 naira at all. That is not where the problem is, because they were already the one that said accept.
So where's the problem?
Where they have problem is the federal government and the state government.
But the federal government says they will pay 30.
No. The federal government have not done. We have told the federal government, if you insist it's not you, why not do your own bit? Your own bit is to transmit the 30,000 to the National Assembly.
Okay.
In 2011, after the legislation, after the law was passed, we went from state to state, enforcing, okay, the implementation of 18,000. Oh, go ahead, do your own job. And the president has refused to do his job. We are waiting. I think the legislative hour has gone. I hope he has transmitted that. If not, we're already discussing.
But who is
When we
putting
meet,
a tab on
how
this?
we take action.
Who is putting a tab on this? How are you?
The timeline.
Yes.
They on their own asked to be given till 23rd.
Okay.
Which is today. So in few hours,
News
it has
will
already
break.
expired.
News will break. We're waiting for an update.
It's the National Assembly. We have our people at the National Assembly. They will inform us if that has been done.
Okay, let me come to you, Uche.
Okay.
Would you support a shutdown of the economy? Because that's the threat on the table by the organized labor now. They're saying if nothing happens, and after their meeting on Friday, they might, whatever happens, the government should not blame them. In this struggle, would you support a shutdown of the economy, knowing that the ripple effect might not favor the Nigerian workers we're trying to protect?
Well, it might not favor us in the short term, but I think in the long term it will. I really think we need to all be united in this fight. I don't think anyone should expect something good to happen, you know, without sacrificing something. So this is a matter of life and death in many situations. We can't just sit here. Maybe some of us are really comfortable in our lives and, you know, just sit back and say, well, you know, don't want to shut down the economy. No, shut it down if you have to. I'm sorry, but that's just the way I am, you know, just shut it down if you have to. But let's do it to get a result. And they've come this far. I think you've got to go the whole way.
You're nodding.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something.
Well, you see, when you're pushed to the wall, that's the only thing that is left for you. And let me also make it clear. The meeting of Wednesday, United Labour Congress is not involved in that meeting. We're not going to be involved. We have done talking with the government. United Labour Congress of Nigeria, ULC, will not be a party to a waste of time. The issues are very, very clear. Transmit. Had they transmitted 30,000 today? If not, we would, by tomorrow, continue engaging the civil society organizations and other labor centers to ensure that we do the needful. We have not said we are going on strike. We have not said what we are going to do, but we're not going to say it. Nigerians will wake up. The various sectors will wake up and see what we have done. Because we have already issued a communique when we had an organized labor meeting in Lagos here. All the leaders of the presidents of the three labor centers were there. I was the secretary of that meeting. And we issued a communique. And we said, you transmit. If you don't transmit, this is what we will do. And we will do it.
Okay.
Let me ask this
It's
question. Are you in the know of this conspiracy theory that all of these moves, the delay, the back and forth, is a ploy to pass the bulk, so to speak, by one government to another, so they don't have to take up the responsibility of, you know, burdening the country, so to speak, with huge debt with this minimum wage?
That would be a funny conspiracy. If that were the case, then it would mean that the present government is not thinking about coming back into power. So that would mean that there will be no continuation, which is strange, you know, if that's what they're campaigning for.
Strange.
So if I were them, I wouldn't, that theory just wouldn't work for me. I think what they need to do is agree to this. I mean, just transmit it. That's all you need to do. And then let the enforcement come from you guys.
Will it affect their chances in this election if, for instance, for some untoward reason, they are unable to transmit it to the National Assembly?
We will mobilize Nigerian workers and masses to vote against any government, any man, any woman, any government, anywhere that decides to go against us in this minimum wage. If we don't get it, we are going to mobilize effectively, and we are not playing politics with this. We are not being diplomatic about it. You don't like Nigerian workers, it is clear. You don't want us to leave, it is clear. You want us to continue suffering, it's clear. You want Nigerian workers to continue being deprived, it's clear. You are emasculating us, it's clear, and we have to. It will be responsible for us to fold our hands and watch this continue.
Don't you think that sounding this stuff? Don't you think that sounding this stuff would come off to the government as trying to force its hand?
To do what?
To pay minimum wage at this point.
We have started. I remember I tried to be historical. I said from 2015.
To agree to what it can do.
We have been pleading. This government. This government has more naira than the previous government, and that is the truth. You look at the budget alone will explain. The salaries of Nigerian workers are not paid in foreign exchange; they are paid in naira.
Okay.
And so this government has more naira than any other government in history.
Chris, let me ask you this. I can feel that you have been fighting for this. You know, you've been part of struggles in the past. Now, what kind of future, what's the outlook? Because I think that this is something that labor leaders wouldn't want to carry forward. The next time it's time to review the minimum wage, do you want to fight again? What is labor, organized labor, essentially doing to ensure that this fight stop and that the right things are done at the right time?
You can answer that in about 30 seconds because we need to go on
the
break.
Various governments to make the minimum wage adjustment automatic. In other societies where things are done normally, the minimum wage is attached to the inflation rate, a threshold. Once it gets to a threshold, the minimum wage is automatically adjusted. We have pleaded with them several times, this is what we should do, but they have refused. And as long as they have refused, we will not fold their hands, we'll keep on engaging them.
Okay, yes, we're still talking about the tussle for the new minimum wage. Remember, you can join the conversation by sharing your thoughts with us on any of our social media platforms. Nigeria Decides returns after this break.
You're still watching Nigeria Decides, the countdown to the general elections here on Plus TV Africa. We're still talking the minimum wage, and joining us to continue this conversation is a lawyer. He is Laborious Oshoma. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's just put you in the spot immediately. Is Labour being realistic?
You need to, this issue, you need to look at it from both perspectives. The perspective of government and the perspective of Labour. We're very good at throwing money at problems. And that's where I see, Labour's insistence on, look, this is not enough, this is enough, or what's enough, really? Can salary ever be enough? That's a big question. Can it ever be enough? No, the answer is no, it can never be enough. But your take home should be able to take you home. And mind you, we're talking about minimum wage. Also, you have to put in perspective the multiplying effect on the economy. And coupled with the fact that, yes, I disagree slightly with that position of the federal government having minimum wages. Because the Act says there shall be a minimum wage. Okay. So this idea of having minimum wages, first and foremost, doesn't cut it for me. But then Labour really needs to think outside the box. This filibuster attitude of Labour also, it's not helping matters. Year in, year out, we come back to the table discussing minimum wage. You must increase, you won't increase. We need to think outside the box. We need to look at the bigger picture, the holistic picture. It's the number of people that work, in public sector is not up to 20%, of the total number of workers we have in Nigeria. And the minimum wage had said, the projection is if you have about up to 25 workers in your payroll, then you must pay the minimum wage. But how about people who don't have up to 25 workers in their payroll? How about people who, even though the minimum wage act is there, are supposed to be earning 18,000 in government establishment, but are earning 10,000, are earning 5,000? Have we, put all of this in perspective? Okay. So it's not just enough to throw money at problem. It's also, we need to find ways of generating these funds, or find ways, alternative ways of plugging loopholes, so that it's not enough. Even 18,000, we have so many states that are yet to pay salaries. Okay. Owing 10 months, 18 months.
Before you go further, I would like to take you back to something you said. You said this filibuster approach by Labour, that they should think outside the box. Yeah. I'm sure that somebody is listening to know just what Labour should do at this time, so that it's not just about salaries. You find out that when we discuss the plight of workers, we narrow it down to wages. And so, once government pays you that minimum wage, then everything is okay. But you forget also that the woman in the market is waiting to collect, who does not work in government, is waiting to collect his own minimum wage. The landlord also is waiting to collect his own minimum wage from that money. So also, what I expect Labour to be doing is a total package, There were times in this country where you work in government establishment, you didn't need to bother about housing, you didn't need to bother about some of the basic things we bother about now. Why is Labour not interested in all of this welfare, health, accommodation? Why is it that we are so particular about this minimum wage that will never be enough? Okay, please.
I think Chris must be burning to say something.
I think there is a paucity of understanding of what Labour does. I have tried to educate many people on this. Minimum wage is just a fraction of what we do. Okay. It's not up to 1%. It's just 0 points.
We don't have much time, so you need to actually educate us quickly.
When we talk about governance effectiveness in the labor movement, essentially all these other packages are what we talk about. Every day, we engage governance at different levels. We engage our social partners on housing, on education, on infrastructure, or engage them in everything. When you talk of the National Health Insurance Scheme in Nigeria today, it was pioneered by the labor movement.
But the Labour fight to finish like it is fighting now. I think that's...
You see quickly.
And they have come. You have National Housing Insurance Scheme in Nigeria. It is a product of the struggle of the labor movement in Nigeria.
Let the verse say something.
Can I?
Okay, let him finish what he has to say, then you can... Let him finish.
The labor movement is involved in transportation in Nigeria.
And those labor vehicles, where are they today?
No, they are still operational.
Where?
They are in Lagos. Plenty.
Okay.
Now I'm calling.
Where? How many do you see?
You see them all over Lagos. The red buses belong to the labor. The red buses. The red big buses.
The BRT.
Yes.
The most we've seen Labour do.
They belong to TUC.
Hold on, Chris. The most we've seen Labour do in recent years, they only go on strike usually over minimum wage. We rarely hear Labour
seriously.
going
no.
Seriously, you see the bigger problem, the bigger picture. Some of these members of government graduate from labor movement and get into government, and then they begin to tell you, oh, this one is not feasible. You see, ASU is talking about the total package for the institution. They're talking about research grants, they're talking about infrastructure, they're talking about diversifying welfare into a knowledge-based economy instead of this agriculture, that because if you need to add value to agriculture for it to be profitable. And what I'm talking about here is the value added.
Okay.
Value added. The labor bosses that we're talking about, there were days when labor bosses were everywhere. Labor were managing labor bosses. If labor couldn't manage buses to generate revenue, what's the guarantee that if you throw more money at problems, that it will solve the problem?
Let him chip in.
Sorry, comrade.
We really don't have much time.
So what's the guarantee that when we come back tomorrow, because with the inflation, attendant inflation, we're not going to be discussing another round of minimum wages that will, like I said, that will never be enough.
Thank you so much.
We need to do much more than just wages.
The minimum wage has a lifespan of 5 years. It's a statutory thing. So whether the economy is making progress or not, it must be negotiated.
Okay, let me ask this question.
Let me tell you some of the areas I'm talking about. Quickly, you have been talking before I came on.
We really don't have that much time.
Please.
Liberus, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. But something that we haven't answered, who is covered under the minimum wage? Because we're talking of private sector, who qualifies? In this sense, yes, because somebody who has a house help is asking, am I also going to be required to pay that much?
One of our demands in during this year's negotiation is to expand the reach of the minimum wage, the coverage. Okay? We are more interested in those places where you employ 3 persons, 4 persons.
But that's not covered by this particular plan.
That is essentially, when you look at my opening intro, that was what I was saying. That we need more, that we asked for that. That was one side of what we are demanded for. So when we go for minimum wage negotiation, it's not just the figure. It involves other things.
That's
quickly, please.
Can I get a response to that question about most often what we hear is labor going on strike?
That's where I'm coming to.
I put that question.
You only hear of minimum wage negotiations here. You hardly hear of minimum wage negotiations in other parts of the world. You know why? Do you know why? Because labor, the word labor is all encompassing. They concentrate more on job creation. So because if there are alternative, government, you don't need to sit down with government to begin to negotiate minimum wages. Take, for example, there were days in England where nursing was unattractive. And so, because of the nature of the job, so a lot of people left it. But for government didn't need to sit down with nurses to negotiate minimum wage. They needed to attract people back to that profession. So what did they do? They upped the pay. And so people voluntarily started leaving other jobs to move into those jobs. And so when labor begin to look towards creating alternatives, here you're trained to look for job. You are not trained to create jobs.
Don't you think that it has to do more with the education?
That's where you see when that's what I'm telling you. We are all part of the problem. When labor goes to sit down, discuss
laborers, we're trying to focus on labor and their agitation.
I am telling you, I'm giving you some of the reasons why this minimum wage issue will not go away. I was one of those years back that
all of this conversation, let me interrupt you. All of this conversation has a lifespan.
Yes.
This administration is probably going to go away, or they're going to come back again. Why? So this thing has to be resolved within a short period of time.
Do you know why the administration is doing this now? Remember, at the beginning of the year, the administration did say that by September, the new minimum wage will take effect. And by September, the negotiations were still back and forth. By November, the government said, even the tripartite committee said there was an agreement. And then, but to be left to the president to announce that 3 wages amounts were nominated or prescribed, and that the president was left to. And so what I am saying, at the end of the day, if you say we take between 35 and 30, and the president now comes and says, okay, I take 30, you say, no, it won't be enough. You must go to 35. Why give options? And then outside of all of this, you need to also stretch the imagination. What will reduce this problem so that 5 years from now, we won't come back to the negotiation table to begin to discuss these same issues that we discussed before. Because 5 years ago, the minimum wage was, we need to start from 50.
I need to bring Chris in to speak now. The question about agitating for something other than minimum wage. We'll have issues. You've still not answered that question. We have issues of housing, what do you call health, transportation, insurance. These are all under the umbrella. So could you talk a bit on that?
Like I said, the minimum wage is just less than 1% of what we do. All these other ones you mentioned, there's a housing program going on now by this government in conjunction with the labor movement all over the 6 geopolitical zones.
There's never been a time in this country that you went to strike other than minimum wage.
When you ask for these ones, they are easily resolved. But minimum wage, they show a level of insensitivity.
You say they are easily resolved?
Yes, those other ones you talk about are easily resolved. That's what I'm telling you. The housing, that's why I gave you the example of the housing. I gave you the example of the transport issue. The example of NHIS. These were all issues that the labor movement championed.
You see, my comrade here is contradicting himself.
No,
just allow him to finish. We'll come back to you.
Comrade. One thing is this. The tripartite committee submitted 1 figure, not 2.
But government said 3.
Are you listening to government or you are listening to me? I am telling you that the tripartite committee submitted 30,000 naira, which was read on television for all of us to hear. And which some of us were there, 30,000 naira, and we have the report.
It's in the papers.
And we have the report. We are members of the committee. So 30,000 naira is in the report. The president himself promised when he was receiving that report that he was going to transmit 30,000 naira.
Well, so why are you so worried if you don't believe that the NCS has, that's the Nigerian National Council of State, has any power to actually...
Their power is advisory.
Yes.
Advisory.
So why the agitation? Why the annoyance?
You had the Minister of Labour after that. In summation.
But that is the same minister that has been talking with Labour.
It's the Minister of Labour that now said that the federal government will transmit.
Yes.
That was the language he used. We transmit so and so. It was based on that. Mind you, yesterday, the CWC of USC was in session while that was going on. And so the CWC in session took a decision immediately concerning that. You
see, my pain in all of this, my pain really is not that it's not good to negotiate minimum wage. You talked about housing, you talked about welfare, total welfare package. It's almost as if it is only the government workers, a few, not even all, that are captured. On this, captured, or on this. Even when you discuss minimum wage, what comes to mind only is those people who work in government. That's what comes to mind. There are workers in Nigeria who work in establishments that have more than 50 staffs and they are still paying them 10,000 naira. I can tell you, I'm on national and international platform and I'm saying it with all sense of modesty. And so, when you have all of this, there is never going to be a time where even if you negotiate 100,000 naira minimum wage, some states will tell you they can't pay. They would rather sack staffs.
But isn't that
let me finish. That's where I'm going to. So that's why you need to think through the process. It's an entire gamut of, process. And so I expected Labour should come out with a paper on all of this, answers to all of these problems and multiplying effect. One, as we speak now, even 18,000 minimum wage there are states that are owing salaries. If you increase it, let's assume you have increased it.
Should we reward them?
No,
disobeying the law?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Not to interrupt you, but
at the end of the day, what do you do?
Can I just
to
bring
protect
him in?
those workers?
This is a pertinent point to raise. You are saying ignore these people. You asked for 18,000 they could not pay.
I am saying.
No.
I didn't
You
say
said
ignore them. I said, do you reward
them?
Let me answer that question.
What happens now that you're asking for 30?
No.
Does it mean that
the fact that I didn't arrest?
We need to make this a bit more orderly. One person speak
The fact that I
at a time.
didn't arrest other thieves does not mean that I should not do what?
That's where I am.
You disobeyed the law.
You didn't allow me to
refused
land
to
on
pay
this.
18,000 naira. And somebody is saying because of that I should reward you.
There are your workers. No, that's not what I'm
And now let me
saying.
also say something again.
Comrade, let me.
Now, in other societies where you have this infrastructure, all these things we talk about. In other societies.
Okay, gentlemen, so that this thing is orderly, I need you to allow one person to speak. When you're done speaking,
I was the one that you interjected.
I interjected to quickly ask you this question so you can answer quickly and allow him
on
to
your question.
You land, you have 1 minute to land. Yes.
And so, for minimum wage, you're talking about, I said 18,000, some people can't even pay. 18 months salaries. What is labor doing to even protect those ones that have not been paid? Those ones that are owing, go to Ekiti, they are owing salary. Oshu, it was in the news. Everywhere. And now, those people couldn't even get 18,000. And now, if you increase it to 30,000, God knows if they will ever get at all. And so that's why I'm saying, it shouldn't just be about salary increments. Because governors are complaining, there's no money. We operate a feeding bottle economy where everybody rushes to Abuja. Also, in talking about minimum wage, in making recommendations, I also want to see how labor will encourage the society, help create alternative sources of revenue, so that at the end of the day, we don't have to run to the federal government every 5 years to begin to discuss minimum wage.
Okay, now let's
Labour will run the economy. Labour will run Nigeria. We will run the federal government. We will run the state governments. That's what Comrade.
You are now the one misunderstanding what he's suggesting.
We are going to run the government. But one thing is clear. In other societies where you have all these things put in place, housing, health, education, transportation, minimum wage is still negotiated. Minimum wage is still discussed. So the provision of all these does not invalidate, does not take away, does not make minimum wage unnecessary.
Nobody's
Do we understand? Now, so it is not, the minimum wage is not an aberration. It is a requirement. It is one of those policy tools that can also be used to drive the economy.
Chris, what I need you
And
to
that is
address
when it becomes
now
a sing-song,
that
it defeats
we
the purpose.
know that the minimum wage has, some states haven't paid the minimum wage.
Okay.
And they tell us they don't have money and people are being owed even till today.
Yeah, they are going to work.
So how do you address that as organized labor? What has organized labor effectively done to ensure, haven't we gotten to a point where states should be allowed to at least have an input in this, so that we don't keep having
It was so bad in Imo.
where
the governor said,
we are going to pay so amount,
work for 2
and some
days,
people don't
farm
get
for 3
anything
days.
It is no longer a national minimum
It was
wage.
comical.
When you talk of a national minimum wage, you're talking of a wage floor. A nation sits down and decides that this is the list we will allow our citizen to go below. A citizen of this country should not go below 18,000 or 30,000 naira. That is a floor. I'm coming. You take all those into consideration. The governors were part of the tripartite committee. Six of them were there. They were represented. They chose the people that will represent them, and so they made all those inputs into those arguments. We took into consideration those people that cannot pay, those people that have least resources. That was why we came down from 65,000 naira to 30,000 naira. So because those people that you people said are resource poor states.
Yes.
Resource poor states.
So do you think they can pay 30,000 naira?
The fact is that it's not for the paucity of resources.
Let me take the point home.
Let me finish. It is not for the paucity of funds. It's for the paucity of will. It's for the lack of will
still
by those in
not
government to
answering the
implement.
question,
Okay, you don't have resources to implement the minimum wage. Yet
But-
you charter private jets. You are ready
But
of
see, Chris, you're still not.
Wait,
you're still.
sorry.
What do you
no,
want?
Boris, hold on.
Please.
You still are not getting this.
What-
point.
what-
The point we're trying to establish here is
they didn't pay.
what
Will you?
is the fate of this?
Let me tell you- let me tell you
do
the
not get
fate.
this
I
minimum
raised the
wage that
issue.
is approved.
It is a simple thing. We have been engaging governments, various state governments in this issue.
Let-
Let's
I
say
raised
the
it.
trade union movement, okay, in the case of Imo State he talked about, in fact, the three labor centers were involved in engaging Okorocha. Strikes were organized in Imo State. Okorocha, the governor, had to meet with labor leaders and agreed on some packages, which he paid some and has deferred some. It's a process. You see, when we go and shut down the whole state, people will begin to, why are you shutting down the whole state? Why are you doing this? And then we also put under pressure to move back. But at the end of the day, we get the state governors one by one to pay. Wait, in 2011-12, I was involved in some states, directly leading the charge in some states, that governors that refused to pay. Eventually, we got some of them to pay.
And they pay today, and they don't pay
paying.
labor
The ones
rights.
that paying are paying.
Let's
let
hear
me
you,
let me take it home. I started from the top. I ought to have started from here, but I did that intentionally. You remember those days when government increased the price of PMS, labor would break down the neck of government and shut down the entire country, and then everybody will be happy.
Was that minimum wage?
Let me finish.
No, was that minimum wage? Was it minimum
I'm laying
wage?
a foundation. I'm going somewhere. Just worry. Don't worry.
No, was it minimum wage?
Wait. I'm waiting there. And then at the end of the day, while people are ready, preparing, Labour says we have negotiated and then we have agreed. Government is like during Obasanjo's time, they know they want to sell at 40 naira per litre. They'll first take it to 80 naira or 60 naira. And then Labour will come. From 22 naira, they move to 60 naira. Labour will come and then they bring it down to 40 naira. While all of these were going on, Labour were negotiating. But nobody, amongst the masses, nobody negotiated for the masses, the ordinary people, the market women, who were ready to lay down their lives.
Why would you say that they did not do
Let
that?
me finish. Just allow me lay the
Can we
foundation
focus on
quickly.
this
That's where I'm
minimum
going
wage?
to.
Because we
Let
don't
me
have
lay a
that much
foundation
time.
for you. When, if you remember the Occupy Lagos, that was why at the end of the day, Labour was pushed aside. The people decided to take their destiny in their hands, to say, you know what, oftentimes Labour will abandon us midway, go negotiate, and at the end of the day, nobody gets back to us. And so now, you find out that every 5 years you have this long-drawn battle with government on minimum wage. And at the end of the day, it is agreed salaries are not paid. One year sometimes in some cases 22 months. Is it not high time you begin to think outside the box to say, how do we ensure that this approach, we no longer take this approach of just minimum wage. We ensure that money is not only available, but it is available that whatever is agreed would be paid. Now, everybody mouths restructuring, that governance need to run from bottom to top. Nobody talks about it when we are discussing minimum wage. But we know that even if you agree for 30,000, if you don't structure governance that way, it will be impossible to pay. We keep quiet. We say we have agreed on minimum wage because that's what we want to hear. But at the end of the day, what is practicable? It's not agreed upon. That's where the problem is, really. Otherwise, otherwise, 2 naira or 3 naira would have been a problem.
Yeah, let us also
and wrap
understand
up
something.
this, yeah.
I think my comrade here should also understand that when we go for some of these engagement with government, that our comrade, he was also part of the process that
Yes,
led
I
to
was.
some of the negotiations. He was represented. I know, and he understands that he was represented. This
I
ones he says,
demonstrated, but I wasn't represented.
this ones he says that the masses were not carried along.
We were not.
The market women were not. The civil society organizations were not carried along.
We were not.
He knows that he's not telling us what happened.
We were not.
I know the people that I don't want to mention their names here that were part of that process. Those processes, all of us went to Asorok together. All of us went for the negotiation together. I don't want to mention their names here. 4 of them were part of that process.
Okay, so
he knows,
you
and
are-
I know. So he's not telling us what happened, and I'm telling you what happened. So
Finally,
when we go
let's
for
hear
this
your
negotiation,
final
all of us
thoughts.
go.
Yes, let's hear your final thoughts.
Finally, what I am saying,
In in 30 seconds.
Yes, I gave you an instance with what happens with other professions, you know, in saner societies. You don't need to beg government. So when you create alternatives, you learn to use your strength as an organization to channel your energy to areas where you will get results. Because we have been over minimum wage, we'll discover that results, you're not yielding, government won't yield ground and you won't get results. At the end of the day, if, for example, now, Labour is agitating for proper governance structures, knowing fully well that at the end, when governance is run properly the way it ought to run, I don't need to tell them, they will know that loopholes will be plugged. Otherwise, you don't need to go and beg Okorocha. He will give you some and not give you some.
I guess that's where we're going to pause for. Because I know this, if we'll continue this conversation, I won't leave the studio today, but we have other topics that we need to focus on.
And of course, we do hope for a speedy resolution to this minimum wage thing ahead of the election. We've been joined by Liberos Oshoma. He is a public affairs analyst. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we've also had Chris Onyeka. He is the acting Secretary General of United Labour Congress. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you for coming on the show. Don't forget that you can join the conversation by sharing your thoughts on the minimum wage on any of our social media platforms. I will take a quick break, and then, of course, Nigeria Decides returns after now.
Just stay with us.
This is still Nigeria Decides on Plus TV Africa. President Muhammadu Buhari is locally and internationally acclaimed as a man of integrity, but that has left few in doubt about his commitment in fighting corruption. Some have seen his anti-corruption war as lopsided, and some have even described it as a political witch hunt. Joining us now to discuss this, we've got Tokunbo Akimbi. He is a House of Representatives candidate of the Kowa Party, Kosovo.